Well, for more on the Canada-EU trade deal and the Iraq mission, I'm joined now by three MPs from the different parties. Erin O'Toole is a Conservative MP for Durham in Ontario and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade. Peter Julian is the NDP House Leader, and Kevin Lamoureux is the Liberals Deputy House Leader. All three of you, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Erin O'Toole, let's start with what dominated so much of this week, and that is continued questions and continued questioning about the Iraq mission. Can you tell us, where is the mission going? We've heard reports about discussions with the Americans. We've heard reports, too, that the Cabinet will be meeting on Tuesday or Monday or Tuesday of next week to try and decide where the mission's going next. What can you tell us about it?
I think every day there's discussions back and forth between Canada and its allies on the security threat in Iraq, particularly since the airstrikes began, carried out by the United States and some Gulf states as well, which was good to see. So this is multilateral effort facing a threat. So there's constant discussion. What the Prime Minister's been clear on is that between 60 and 70 advisors that were sent, that advisory role and their presence would be reviewed after 30 days. Because you got to remember, this response came together quite quickly, led by the U.S., to have a response to the growing ISIL threat. Canada's participation in that was at an advisory level, but we said we'd constantly review it. I think there continues to be a lot of politics being played on this by the NDP. We've said clearly that if Canada goes to a combat mission, a war-fighting mission, that will come before the House for both a debate and a vote, as it should.
Well,
but when we operate around the world or train or deploy, we don't have debates on every deployment. I think that's the distinction here.
Could that question be put before Parliament before the due date of October 5th? I believe that's next Saturday or Sunday. If the Cabinet's going to meet and if they're going to discuss American requests or Canadian discussion with the Americans, could that be put to Parliament before next week, before the end of next week, before the October 5th deadline?
I don't know of any plans to have a debate before October 5th or when there would ever be one. I think the pledge is that if the mission changes to an active warfighting combat role, the Prime Minister's been clear that that will be debated and voted on in the House. This was an interesting week, Martin, because there was the UN General Assembly. The Prime Minister spoke on the ISIL threat and on global security in New York. He was meeting with other world leaders. Certainly there was also feedback from our militaries and our allies on how the airstrikes were having an effect. So I think this is a fluid situation of military operations. Canada's constantly in touch with our allies. And if things change, I want to be clear, we've said to Canadians, before a combat role, war fighting, we'll bring it to the House. And before that, to posture on it every day, as Thomas Mulcair has done, is just actually politics. It's not really talking about the mission in a meaningful way.
Okay, Peter Julian, your take on this. The Prime Minister, we just saw him this morning very angrily, actually, saying, look, this is small potatoes compared to what we're supposed to be doing over there. All of this concern about who spoke to who, the Americans or the Canadians, we're in discussions, we're into this mission, we will come back to Parliament. He's accusing the other opposition parties of just playing politics.
But I think Erin just made the NDP point. He talked about a very fluid situation, and that has been the problem from the outset. The government hasn't been clear with the Canadian public about our military troops that have been sent to Iraq. And what we've heard is a variety of different messages at different times. Most notably, in the last couple of days, with the Prime Minister pretending that somehow the United States had asked something of Canada when it actually turned out that the offer had come from Canada in the first place. Now, when our soldiers are put on the line, the Conservatives promised that they would subject that to a debate in Parliament and a vote, and they're steadfastly refusing to do it, even though we're seeing very vivid signs of mission creep. It's a very fluid situation. It's changing every day, as Erin has just pointed out. And that is exactly why Tom Mulcair has been raising these questions in the House of Commons, initially getting stonewalled completely, which was showing complete disrespect for the Canadian public. And now more recently, the government seems to be grudgingly providing some information, but still refusing a debate, still refusing a vote. And that's something we insist upon when our soldiers' lives are being put on the line. That's something the Conservatives committed to years ago, and they should do it, have that debate, and have that vote here in Parliament before they continue to expand a mission that seems to be changing on a daily basis.
Okay. Kevin Lamour, your take on this? I mean, the developments we saw this week, some questions, some answers, a lot of developments.
What I find is that the Prime Minister seems to be fixated on the fact that if there is no combat role, that he has no responsibility to come and have the issue debated inside the House of Commons because it's just a deployment. I think that what we need to recognize that this isn't just a standard deployment of Canadian Forces personnel. There's a difference when you send a deployment over to the Philippines to assist the government with a typhoon versus sending a deployment of Canadian forces into Iraq, into the Middle East. There is a great deal of concern that Canadians from coast to coast to coast have in regards to this particular deployment. There's a responsibility for the Prime Minister to take a higher road in ensuring that there's more transparency, that there's some sort of a debate that does occur inside the House prior to us moving forward. This is something in which the Liberals have been pushing for weeks now. In fact, last week we were able to get a bit of a debate going on it during an emergency situation. We think that there needs to be more an all-inclusive discussion that takes place. They should be approaching the NDP and Liberal critics, try to bring us into this process. Don't have such a closed-door attitude. This is not the way in which we should be dealing with this very important issue. And the Liberal Party has been very generous in terms of our patience and trying to work with the government, but it's been very trying in terms of we've seen a Prime Minister that seems to be giving misinformation on some very important points. And at the end of the day, we've got to be careful that we're not drawn into something that Canadians as a whole don't want us to be being drawn into.
Okay, just a last question on this, Aaron, and that is, Aaron O'Toole, you've been in the military and you've watched what's gone on over the last few weeks. The question, you've committed, the government has committed itself that if there's a change in the mission and if that makes the mission a combat mission, we heard from Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird yesterday in New York. There will be a vote. One of the alternatives being considered is airstrikes. Minister Baird said that would make it a combat mission. If you're a betting man, do you think we will be seeing a debate on a combat mission in the next week or two?
Listen, Martin, I'm never a betting person when it's an issue about combat or strikes, because it's putting our men and women in an active combat role with the risks inherent in that. What my friends aren't being clear on is the Prime Minister was very clear on this mission at the start that it would be reviewed. They're also ignoring the fact that the Minister of Defense, the Chief of Defense Staff and others appeared at an all-party committee where this was also discussed at length. And the whole time we've always said that a combat role would be brought to the House for a vote. What the NDP has done. In the last week, they said military deployments, any type of military deployment. Then they realized the military deploys all the time because they don't really understand that. Today, Peter is saying that a debate when our men and women are on the line. So that seems to be his approach today. We've been clear. If we're going into war fighting in the air through airstrikes or on the ground with troops, there will be a debate and vote in the House as there should. The rest of it is politics.
Okay, I want to get to something because we're running out of time, but I want to get to the other big issue, and that is the European Union-Canadian Summit, which just took place today on Parliament Hill. There was the release of the legal text, the draft legal text for the CETA, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement between Canada and the European Union. Huge, huge agreement, a huge text, 1,600 pages. Aaron O'Toole, you know matters of international trade. The Germans, there are still quotes coming out of Germany saying that they want to see changes made to this agreement. How concerned should Canadians be, Canadians who would like to see this ratified, that this might come unglued in Europe?
Martin, Canadians will see this ratified. Both Canada and the EU, including Germany, gave their negotiating teams clear direction that there needed to be investor-state dispute resolution so that everyone could agree ahead of time on how disputes would be resolved. The German government and the EU have used this device countless times, dozens of times in fact. There have been no really substantive reports of problems on this. In fact, yesterday I met with a parliamentary delegation from Germany, and it was extremely positive. Everyone is very excited about CETA and the tremendous opportunity it presents. Remember, this is a market bigger than NAFTA. It's 500 million consumers. There'll be an estimate of 80,000 jobs created in Canada as a result of this agreement, and a $12 billion injection to our GDP. So It has been something the Prime Minister has been working on steadfastly for the last few years. We got the commitment where we agreed on tariff rates and announced those last year and broke it down by region. And today was when we finally were able to release the full text, which is following the legal scrub of all the documents. So we're bringing this out and giving it to Canadians to look at, because this is really a deal with tremendous opportunity for all regions of the country, and we're very excited.
Okay, Peter Julian, what do you make of it? We now have the legal text. There may be some minor changes, but the legal text, all 1,600 pages, is before us. Obviously, I won't ask you to comment on the details of it, but what do you make of it?
I haven't finished reading it yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Neither have I.
But I mean, the Liberals said right away, we're just going to support the agreement. We don't need to read it. We're certainly not of that ilk. We believe in actually scrutinizing legislation. That's why we've identified in the past a number of pieces of legislation that were brought before Parliament that were rejected by the courts. And the NDP predicted they'd be rejected by the courts because they were shoddily drafted. We're going through all the 1,600 pages. We'll be spending the weekend doing that. We're happy now that it's finally been released, but there is no doubt there are real problems with the investor state provisions that this government is trying to force on Europeans, and obviously there's some reports from Germany that they have real problems. The investor state provisions are different in various countries. We actually have the worst, and even the United States have backed off the investor state provisions that were put into NAFTA because for subsequent trade agreements they didn't think it was in the public interest to allow big companies to override the public domain, the public interest, and decisions that are made by public legislatures. And so this is the real problem that the Conservatives refuse to admit to, and which could be a real problem for the agreement. So we agree with the principle of trade with Europe. There's no doubt about that. We're going to be scrutinizing the 1,600 pages over the next few days. We simply won't give a blank check to this government like the Liberals have. We're going to be looking through it, making sure that it's actually in Canada's interest. But Martin, I did want to come back.
No, actually, we're running out of time.
We're
running out of time.
You gave your
in fairness,
right,
but I think we've got.
I think we're just going to have to last point on the Liberals after you've spoken for the Liberals, Peter. Let's leave the last word to Kevin Lamoureux, the Liberals on the European trade deal.
You know, I think that the potential for the economic benefits for every Canadian is there. It's very real. It's tangible. Obviously, we'll have to follow it through. The bigger concern that we have in regards to international world trade has got to be the overall numbers of trade. You've got to remember, when the Prime Minister Harper became Prime Minister of Canada, we had a multi-billion-dollar trade surplus. Since he's been Prime Minister, that surplus has, in essence, completely disappeared to today, where we have a multi-billion-dollar trade deficit. That equates into literally thousands of lost jobs and opportunities for our middle-class Canadians and everyone. It has an impact. So yes, it's important that we work towards free trade agreements, unlike the New Democrats, who have never, ever to date, ever voted in favor of any trade deal agreement.
Canada, Korea. There's two right there. Canada, Korea.
You have not voted. Peter,
right.
Patience. Okay, on that note, we're out of time.
You have not voted.
Okay, on that note, we're out of time. I'm going to have to let you. I'm going to have to leave you to continue this discussion as we wrap up. I want to wish you a productive weekend in your ridings. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks very much, Brian. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Peter's silliness.